If Donald Trump thought he could mock NATO, threaten U.S. allies, and casually insult Denmark without any pushback, he misread the room and the continent. Because at one of the most important global security gatherings of the year, Denmark just answered. And the message for Trump, for Putin, and for the MAGA movement was very simple. Europe heard you, and Europe is done pretending this is a joke. In a moment, I'm going to play you the clip of Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen that has been ricocheting around every foreign ministry in Europe and the U.S. national security community. You're going to want to see exactly how she framed Trump's threats and why the room went so quiet when she did it. Before we roll that, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. Independent channels like this one are actually digging into what global leaders are saying and how it affects your life. Corporate media is too busy with horse race polls and panel shout-fests to walk you through why a small Nordic country just put Donald Trump on notice. This all centers on a major global event, this year's Munich Security Conference, the annual gathering where presidents, prime ministers, generals, and diplomats meet to talk about war, peace, and who's actually going to pay for it. And this year, one name hung over the entire conference like a storm cloud: Donald Trump. Just days before world leaders flew into Munich, Trump bragged at a campaign rally that he told a NATO leader he would encourage Russia to do whatever the hell they want to any ally that didn't, in his words, pay up. That wasn't a gaffe. That was a former American president and current Republican frontrunner, openly saying he would cheer on Vladimir Putin if a NATO ally came under attack. Inside NATO, that landed like an earthquake. You had NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg warning that those comments put all NATO troops at risk. European leaders lined up to say in diplomatic language, "What the hell is he doing?" Even normally cautious officials started using words like dangerous, irresponsible, and a gift to Russia. And then Denmark stepped up and said the quiet part out loud. But before we get to Denmark, you need to understand the mood in that room. This year's Munich conference wasn't the usual polite talk fest. You could feel the anxiety. Ukraine's representatives were blunt. Ammunition is running low, U.S. aid is stalled in Congress, and Russia is grinding forward in the East. European leaders know that if Washington walks away, they aren't ready to fill the entire gap. Vice President Kamala Harris warned that America's credibility is on the line. German officials tried to reassure everyone that Europe is finally ramping up defense spending. Baltic and Polish leaders demanded more air defenses and long-range weapons for Ukraine, not more speeches. You had panel after panel where the subtext was, what happens if Trump wins? What happens if America doesn't show up? So when Mette Frederiksen took the stage, this was already a room full of people who understood exactly what Trump's NATO threat meant. Now, a quick reminder, this is not Denmark's first run-in with Donald Trump. Back in 2019, Trump publicly floated the idea of the U.S. buying Greenland, an autonomous territory of the Kingdom of Denmark, like it was a piece of real estate. When Denmark's prime minister called the idea absurd, Trump canceled his state visit and called her nasty. Most countries would have tried to smooth things over and move on. Denmark took notes. Fast forward to today, the same prime minister Trump insulted is now one of the most vocal leaders backing Ukraine, pushing Europe to rearm and insisting that the West stop tiptoeing around Putin. And she just used a world stage to answer Trump's latest stunt. Here's the setup. On a panel in Munich focused on transatlantic security and the war in Ukraine, Frederiksen was asked about Trump's statement that he'd encourage Russia to attack NATO allies that don't meet spending targets. She didn't roll her eyes. She didn't make a joke. She did something much more powerful. She spoke to the entire American political system and to every European government hiding behind U.S. protection. Here's the essence of what she told the room, and through that room, Trump and his allies. She reminded everyone that NATO is not some optional subscription you cancel when you're bored. It's a mutual defense pact built on a very basic promise. If one member is attacked, all members respond. Undermining that, she said, doesn't just hurt Europe, it weakens the United States because the alliance is one of America's biggest strategic advantages. She pointed out that Denmark is already doing what Trump keeps demanding, increasing defense spending, sending weapons to Ukraine, and taking real risks. This is a country of under 6 million people that has donated F-16 fighter jets, artillery, and billions in aid to Ukraine, and hit NATO's 2% spending goal ahead of schedule. Then she raised the stakes. Frederiksen essentially said, if someone in Washington wants to turn NATO into a protection racket, pay us or we cheer for Putin, Europe has to be ready to defend itself, with or without that person in the White House. You could almost feel the message directed straight at Trump. We heard your threat. We're not going to build our security on your tantrums. And that's the clip I'd be rolling right here. You'd see her calm and controlled, looking around that hall and making it clear this is not a game. This is about whether Putin feels free to test NATO's borders because an American candidate thinks that sounds tough at a rally. But she didn't stop at Trump. Frederickson turned the conversation back to Ukraine. And this is where she's been consistently ahead of a lot of larger countries. She argued that you don't win a war by endlessly promising support while putting artificial limits on what your ally can actually do. Ukraine, she said, cannot be expected to defend itself if it's forbidden from striking the bases, logistics hubs, and command centers inside Russia that are being used to kill Ukrainian civilians. In other words, stop making Ukraine fight with one hand tied behind its back. Think about what Ukraine has already done with the limited tools it has. A war that Kremlin planners thought would last 4 days is now in its third year. Cheap Ukrainian drones have forced parts of the Russian Black Sea Fleet to retreat. Russian oil refineries and ammunition depots hundreds of miles from the front have gone up in flames from Ukrainian strikes. Now add real air defense, long-range missiles, and modern jets, including the F-16s Denmark is helping to provide and train pilots on. Frederickson's point was clear. If you actually want Ukraine to win, stop being afraid of your own shadow. Help them hit the targets that matter. Show Putin that escalation works both ways. So when you put this all together, what did Denmark just do? First, they called out Trump's NATO blackmail without hiding behind vague language. A small U.S. ally that Trump once tried to bully over Greenland is now saying in public that Europe has to be ready for an America that might walk away from its own commitments. Second, they expose the contradiction at the heart of Western policy on Ukraine. Politicians say, we stand with Ukraine, then block the very tools Ukraine needs to change the battlefield. Denmark is one of the few countries saying, enough, either we're serious about this or we're not. Third, they signaled to Putin that the MAGA wing in Washington is not the only game in town. Even if Trump tries to turn NATO into a stage prop, there are European leaders planning for a world where they carry more of the load and where Russia doesn't get to dictate the terms. And there's an irony here that's hard to ignore. The man who boasted about buying Greenland now finds himself publicly rebuked by the leader of the very country he tried to treat like a real estate listing. Trump's threats have done what decades of polite diplomacy couldn't. They've pushed Europe, including Denmark, to spend more on defense, deepen cooperation, and get louder about confronting Russia. He tried to intimidate them. He ended up motivating them. If Ukraine eventually gets the weapons it needs to hit Russian military targets at scale, if Europe finally builds a serious long-term defense posture, if NATO emerges from this era more united and less dependent on any one U.S. politician, then historians may look back at comments like Trump's "do whatever the hell they want" line as the moment Europe stopped assuming America would always be there and started acting like a grown-up power. And Denmark, of all countries, will be remembered as one of the voices that forced that conversation. If you want more coverage that actually connects these dots, from a Trump rally in South Carolina to a speech in Munich to a trench outside Kharkiv, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel. You're not just helping us grow. You're helping build a counterweight to the MAGA movement and its media echo chamber, and amplifying leaders who are standing up to both Trump and Putin instead of cowering behind platitudes.